All right, you can put your hymnals away, and we will take our Bibles now and go over to Isaiah chapter number 46 this evening. As we make our way through the book of Isaiah, we come to a chapter here it's not incredibly long, and it holds some of the same information as what we've been reading, but I like how it is phrased here in this instance. In Isaiah chapter number 46, Isaiah here, again through the inspiration of God, is going to be speaking about idol worship, but he's going to be speaking to Israel about it yet again, trying to remind them of the important fact that no matter how interesting all of the idols around you may appear, no matter how appealing their cultures might appeal, Israel, I am your God. I am the only God, and I will be there to carry you through. You don't need to carry me. We've made this statement previously that what good is a God that you have to carry? What good is a God that you have to build a foundation for? What good is a God that you have to prop up? What good is a God that you have to defend? Israel, you have a God, and He is the Creator, and He is the Almighty God. Will you not return back to Him? This is the message of Isaiah. And so, chapter number 46 here only has 13 verses, but there's some good stuff going on here in these verses, and I want to take a look at them. It begins off here in verse number 1, mentioning a couple names of gods, false gods, lowercase g gods, that the Babylonians worshipped. It says there in Isaiah 46, verse number 1, Bel boweth down, Nebo stoopeth. Their idols were upon the beasts and upon the cattle. Your carriages were heavy loaden, but they are a burden to the weary beast. They stoop, they bow down together. They could not deliver the burden, but themselves are gone into captivity. We get here into chapter number 46, and again I remind you in chapters 44 and 45, Isaiah has been prophesying to Israel about a man by the name of Cyrus. You remember who he was. We've talked about him before. Cyrus is a future king of Persia, the Medes and the Persians. He's a future king. This is 210 years from the time that Isaiah prophesies this before Cyrus is even born. Cyrus is mentioned by name even. Now in chapter number 46, Isaiah is not going to mention Cyrus by name, but he is going to talk about him at the very end. But he's still talking about this same message. You know, Israel, or in this case Judah, you are going to be conquered by the Babylonians. You are going to be captured. You are going to be carried off into captivity. A lot of C's there. And this is all going to happen by the Babylonians, but worry not. Even though I'm choosing to use the Babylonians to discipline you, I'm not going to allow them to wipe you out and to destroy you because you are my people. And understand this, nobody can wipe out God's people because God has promised to continue the line of David, the line of Israel. Even into the end times, even into the book of Revelation, Israel is still there, and they turn their hearts back to the Lord. I'm not sure I've witnessed a time where such a large amount of people around the world have been against Israel. I think it has been in an undercurrent in many places, but now we're starting to see it come and boil to the surface. And so you see in universities all around the United States today, you see them leaving classes, skipping classes. You see them gathering by the thousands out in front of the universities or going into cities and protesting against Israel, pro-Palestine. They want free Palestine. And you know what they're saying is? From the river to the sea, Palestine must be free. What does that mean? From the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Ocean, there should be no Israel there. Just Palestine. Well, then where's Israel going to go? They don't care. They want Israel completely gone. Intifada, they'll stand out there and they'll shout Intifada, Intifada. And this would be considered the third great Intifada. This is a war against Israel to not just drive them from the land, they want them completely gone. We can take solace in the fact that we know what's going to end up happening one day. So we don't have to get too concerned. Now, we don't like to watch innocent lives be taken. No matter where in the Middle East they're taken, we don't like to watch that. It's not a pleasant thing. But here God is speaking to Israel and saying, I am going to use Babylon. And again, Babylon wasn't even an empire at this point when Isaiah was making this statement. I am going to use Babylon to come in and conquer you and pick you up and take you off captive into other lands. Ooh, that's harsh. But then he says, but later, I'm going to use another heathen king, an unsaved man, to do my will to bring you back, to return you back to the land. Not only that, to help you rebuild Jerusalem, and not only that, to help you begin to rebuild the temple. This was Cyrus. Now, we look at the false gods mentioned here in verse number 1. We have Bel. This is not Baal, B-A-A-L. This is Bel. This is a god of Babylon, otherwise known as Marduk. Marduk is a god that finds its lineage all the way back to the Tower of Babel, all the way back to post days of Noah. This is a really ancient god, so to speak, that many nations have worshipped, this god of Marduk, and it's carried a variety of different names, but this is Bel. This is the weather, the war, the sun god. There was prostitution and child sacrifice included in the worship of Bel. And then we also here, you have the god Nebo. Nebo is another familiar name as far as gods go. This god was the god of the royal family. So this was the one that protected the kings, the queens, those who were in charge, the royal family. He is the son of Marduk. He represents learning, astronomy, and science. Also was worshipped in some very vile ways. These were the gods of Babylon. Now Babylon, this is that wall of enemy that seems impenetrable, and they're marching there on Jerusalem, and there's nothing that Israel can do, nothing that Judah can do, and it seems like all is lost. And here you have Bel and you have Marduk, among other gods, that seem to be, where they're unable to overcome them, but God reminds them of something. Bel boweth down, Nebo stoopeth. Their idols were upon the beasts and upon the cattle. Your carriages were heavy loaden. They are a burden to the weary beast. They stoop, they bow down together. They could not deliver the burden, but themselves are gone into captivity. And here he speaks of these quote-unquote great gods of the Babylonians. Even their great gods had to be picked up and carried. Even their great gods were a weight, were a heavy load. And even their great gods were not able to prevent Babylon from being taken by the Medes and the Persians. And we've talked about Cyrus of the Medes and the Persians coming in one single night. He diverts the Euphrates River, and then he comes and goes underneath the walls of the city of Babylon. The doors are somehow left unlocked, and he enters in through those giant brass doors into the city of Babylon and takes the city in one night. God prophesied this here in Isaiah 200 years before it ever happened. And so he mentions these gods. He says, understand this. You look over at their culture and you think, man, their gods sure are powerful. Look what their mighty army. Look at how much they've been able to conquer. Their gods must be powerful. But God says, no, they're just idols like any others. They have to be born, they have to be carried, they have to be fashioned, they have to be stood up, and if the base isn't made well enough, it'll fall over, and the God can't do anything to help itself. It's no God at all. We continue on to verse number 3. He says, hearken unto me, O house of Jacob, and all the remnant of the house of Israel. And again, we see this dichotomy as he speaks to Jacob, the deceiver, and as he speaks to Israel, the chosen. Hearken unto me, O house of Jacob, and the remnant of the house of Israel, which are born from me from the belly. By me from the belly, which are carried from the womb, and even to your old age I am He. And even to the hoar hairs will I carry you. I have made, and I will bear. Even I will carry and will deliver you. And we get some amazing images here that is given to us. And Isaiah uses a ton of imagery or illustrations in his preaching. And it's great because it gives us a good, it's something we can relate to. He starts off there in verse number 3, saying, you have been born by me from the belly. And so we see a physical birth here. I birthed you. I made you who you were. Of course, we go back to the time of Abraham, when Abraham, at the Abrahamic covenant, was given a promise that from his seed would a great nation would be made. We saw this come to fruition through Jacob, that this great nation would be made. We see the 12 sons, or 13 sons. We see the 12 tribes of Israel being born there. We see a great nation that is saved from starvation. By whom? Joseph, down in Egypt, who had been sold there by his brothers, but God put him there for a reason. God put him there to prepare for that 7 years of famine so that his future nation Israel would have a place to go and get food, would have a safe harbor for a time. Well, that safe harbor in Egypt didn't last very long, did it? It was several hundred years before the pharaohs of that time began to worry about these Hebrews. And they began to exercise control over those Hebrews and put them to work, which turned into slave labor, and then it became rough. And then God raised up a man by the name of Moses, by which to bring his new fledgling nation out of captivity by Egypt and into the land that he had promised Abraham long before that he would place them. And thus begins the 10 plagues, or the calling of Moses, the 10 plagues, the travel across the Red Sea, and up into Canaan land for the very first time, which they were not prepared for spiritually, to enter into Canaan land. And so they had to wander in the wilderness of Zin for 40 years before it was finally time for them to enter and cross the Jordan River and enter into the land of Canaan. He says here in verse number 3, I birthed you. I birthed you. God foresaw and spoke in advance that this was what was going to happen. I birthed you. And now if we have a God that is so powerful to foresee thousands of years prior to His existence, a nation that is going to be born, and then He goes out of His way to put His hands out there as guardrails to make sure that this nation does not go off one way or the other, to make sure that this nation continues to grow, have a safe place to grow, food to eat during the great famine. If we have a God that can do that, then why in the world, when times get good, would we suddenly turn our focus away from that God to something or someone else? And how many times do we do something very similarly? Early on in life, there's big decisions to be made. And in those big decisions, and there's much stress over those decisions, and we go on our knees before the Lord, and we open our Bibles, and we pray, and we read, and we pray, and we read, and there's sweet fellowship with God, and then He opens up our eyes to what His path is for us to do, whether it be college or career or a dating relationship, or you name it. God opens up our understanding as to what we are to do, and He guides our steps. And when things are meager, maybe early on in the marriage, early on in life, when there's not a whole lot of money and not a whole lot of furniture and not a whole lot of food on the shelves, and things are a little bit more difficult at that time, and you just pray and you work and you pray and you read and you're faithful, and boy, fellowship with God is sweet, and God provides, and God provides, and God provides. And then as time goes by, things get a little bit easier. As time goes by, you don't have to struggle quite so much. And so we stop bowing down before the God of heaven. We stop relying upon God for things, and we begin to turn instead to other things. Our jobs, our bank accounts, ourselves, and our own abilities. And God reminds us of this. I birthed you. If you go back way long before you had this job, or long before you had this thing, or long before you were in this place, long before everything was great, I birthed you. Even before you were born, I knew you in your womb. Even before you were conceived, I knew you. And I have guided you along every step of the way because you've desired me to. And now you'll turn away from me? I don't understand. Why then would we turn away from God? Parents can understand this mindset from God's perspective. From the time before a child is even born, mom and dad are already thinking and planning. They're already preparing themselves. And then the child is born, and of course, it's a great effort to keep a child alive, to keep them from, destroying themselves for the first 18 years of their lives. That's pretty much all they're trying to do is to off themselves. And so you got to keep them from sticking their fingers in the outlets, and you got to keep them from drinking the stuff underneath the sink, and you got to, all that kind of stuff. And parents go through so much work trying to put those guardrails down to keep the children in, to guide them, to protect them so that they can make it to adulthood when their brains are capable of making decent decisions without you. But then before they actually get to that point, they get to be in 8th grade, that know-it-all stage where they know more than mom and dad does, and they get to be to that point, and suddenly they don't really want to listen to mom and dad anymore. And they start to say, listen, no, you just go over there and do your thing, mom and dad, and I'll be over here doing my thing. You don't need to check my phone, mom and dad. You don't need to check my computer. You don't need to check up on what I'm listening to and what I'm watching. You don't need to know who my friends are. Mom and dad, you don't need to know any of these things. I'm a big boy now. I'm a big girl now. I'm an adult. Treat me like one. And then they cry and throw a fit later the same day. But, I'm a big boy now. You don't need to check up on me. And just like Israel, a child can do the same thing. Oh, now I can handle a few things on my own. I don't need you anymore, God. God says, I bore you, I birthed you, which are carried from the womb. He says, and even to your old age, I am He. And even to the hoar hairs, these are the gray hairs, those white hairs, He says, even till then will I carry you. Think about this. Here's an image for you. When a child is born, the parents have to carry them in every sense of the word, right? They have to carry them, they have to feed them, they have to bathe them and clothe them. There's nothing a baby can do on their own. As a child grows, they can do more and more things on their own. And as time goes on, they become more and more capable, and mom and dad become less and less capable, until at some point the child then has to bear mom and dad. But that's never going to happen with God. He says, I birthed you, but you know what? Even until your gray hairs, even until you can't even lift yourself up off of the chair, God says, I will be there to carry you. That's exactly what He says. I am He, and even to the hoar hairs will I carry you. I have made, and I will bear. I took upon me the responsibility, God says, to make you a nation, and so I will bear you. Let's stop and think about that for a second. Here, this promise is being made to Israel. I know I'm taking it and I'm making application to us as Christians as well, but this promise is being made to Israel. And so God says, listen, I saw fit to make sure that you were created, that you were protected along the way, and that you became a nation, and I'm not going to just walk away and give up on you. I think here's another good passage dealing with the idea that God has not completely rejected Israel for an eternity, that God has not replaced Israel with the church. He says, even until your gray hairs, I will bear you. You know what that meant? That meant even despite your rebellion, I will bear you, Israel. Now, I will discipline you, yes, but I will still be your God, and I will still be there to carry you, and I will still be there to protect you. He says, I have made and I will bear. Even I will carry and will deliver you. Might have been hard for Israel at the point when they saw Babylonian soldiers either coming over the walls of Jerusalem or storming through the gates to think to themselves, this is God protecting us. This is God looking after us. That might have been a difficult time for Israel to say, oh, this is of God. Nevertheless, it was. It was prophesied. God said, this is what's going to happen, and it's for your good that I'm going to do this. But there's a verse in Luke 12, 6 and 7. The same fatherly care, Jesus spoke about it. Luke 12, verse 6 and 7 says this, Are not 5 sparrows sold for 2 farthings? And not one of them is forgotten before God? But even the very hairs of your head are all numbered. Fear not, therefore. Ye are of more value than many sparrows. When we understand that it is He that has made us and that we are valuable to Him, then I think we can begin to understand that we can trust Him to carry us. Children learn to trust very early on in life because they have to. They have no choice. They learn where the food comes from. They learn where the warmness comes from. They learn where the dry, clean diapers come from. And so they learn to trust mom and dad very early on. But you know what parents also have to do? Parents have to make sure the children understand that they are valuable to them. That the child is valuable to mom and dad. That they're not a nuisance. That they're not an imposition. Oh, you came into my life and I didn't want you, but you're here now, so I have to at least pretend I like you. No, that's not it at all. The child has to know that not only do I love them because I told them once, but I tell them every day, many times a day. And not only that, but that I value them. That we value their time, that we value their thoughts, as ridiculous as they may be sometimes, that we value them. And when they learn that, that is when they really begin to learn to trust us. And that same principle or that same formula can apply in a whole lot of other relationships beyond that too. When your spouse begins to understand that they're valuable to you, that you value their opinion, that you value their time, then the trust begins to grow there. It's a worthy question. Do you have to carry your gods, or does your God carry you? It is to be, as Christians, that we don't have to carry God. Oh, we have to carry our Bibles, yes. We ought to carry His Word in our heart, yes. We ought to carry the message of the gospel to the world around us because that is our command, yes. But I don't have to be His power. He wants to use me, yes. But you see, God doesn't need me to defend Him. Now there may be times when I will do just that. To defend the Bible or to defend the church or to defend God Himself. Saw a video recently by a Satanist who was basically attacking God. And I really wanted to use his video and to create an argument against it. But it's a worthy question. Do you have to carry your gods, or does your God carry you? You see, as a church, we're supposed to go out on the offensive. Remember, it's the gates of hell that will not prevail against us. And last I checked, gates don't march. They don't go anywhere. That means that we've got to go to them, that we've got to go knocking down the doors of hell, that we've got to go marching there and dragging people as they get ready to march through those gates willingly. We've got to grab them and pull them back and say, no, there is another choice except living life this way. You don't have to march your way into hell. Do you have to carry your God, or do you let Him carry you? We talked about that on Sunday morning, right? I said the title of Sunday morning sermon, Burdens and What to Do with Them. Some burdens were meant to be carried, were meant to be shouldered. Some burdens were meant to be shed and tossed off, and some burdens were meant to be shared amongst one another. Do you let God carry you and your burden? Look at verse number 5. To whom will ye liken me, and make me equal, and compare me, that we may be like? God asks this, okay, if you're going to compare me to the gods of Babylon, or to the gods of, Assyria, or to some other god out there, who really are you going to compare me to? Is there some other God out there that has given to you what I have? By that, he means that has provided for you a land, that has provided for you a nation out of nothing, out of one person, that has driven the inhabitants of Canaan out of the land before you, that has miraculously provided for you food, that has parted seas and rivers for you? Have you found a God out there that is able to do any of these things? Have you found a God out there that is able to send His prophets to prophesy in advance of events that are going to happen? Have you found a God out there that is willing to send His prophets to their own harm and to their own deaths to come and to warn you to get right before God before judgment comes? Is there some other God that would do that? In fact, no. You know what other gods do? These other gods out there are kind of vindictive. You never really know what they're going to do. You may have to read the entrails of chickens or something like that to find out the will of these gods. It's always somebody's got to die in order to figure out what the gods want. And then you find out later, and this is an evil, vindictive God. But not the God of heaven. The God of heaven is the only God who foresaw our need and said, there's not a thing you can do about it. There is not a thing that you can do. I can't just write some rules for you to keep, because the fact is you can't keep all the rules. So I've got to do something to help these people down there. He says, Israel, do you see any other gods out there that have promised a Messiah? Do you see any other gods out there that are willing to give of their only Son to shed His blood to save you from your sins? Israel, do you see any other gods out there that are like me? Of course, we know the answer to that question is, well, no. Look what he says. These are the Babylonians here he speaks of, they lavish gold out of the bag and weigh silver in the balance and hire a goldsmith, and he maketh it a god. They fall down, yea, they worship. Their statues, their gold and silver statues, were a vast part of their treasures. You know, we buy a Ming vase, or we buy some expensive thing to put in our house, or some expensive vehicle to drive, or some expensive jewelry or clothing to wear, or a real nice gun to stick up on the wall, or we buy some of those things, and to us those are valuable things. Now, they don't have to be our idols, but to the Babylonians and to the many of the nations around them, if they wanted to go out and splurge on something nice, they would go out and they would buy a really nicely crafted idol. Maybe the best they could afford was a nice wooden one, or stone one, or one that was covered in silver or gold or brass to look like gold. That was really splurging for them. That was a social symbol to be able to put that in their house or to wear it around their neck. And so here, as he even speaks of these gods, we can still tie that even to today for us. He maketh it a god. They fall down, yea, they worship. They bear him upon the shoulder. They carry him and set him in his place, and he standeth. They say, this is where you belong. This is what you're supposed to do for me, because we decided that. And so now, do what you're supposed to do. And yet they fall down and they pray to him. That's like creating a computer that is supposed to add and subtract and multiply and divide when you enter the input into it, like a calculator. And then you set that calculator there on the shelf, and you lay down on your knees and you bow down to it and say, please add 2 and 2 for me. Well, of course it's going to add 2 and 2 for you. You designed it to do that. The problem here is their gods can't even add 2 and 2. They designed it to protect them, or to bring rain, or to bring good crops, or to keep away this or that disease. But their gods can't even add 2 and 2. They designed it to do it, and then they get down and they bow down to it and say, please do what we designed you to do. But there's no power there. Because it's not God. Look at verse number 8. Remember this. Well, did I read all of verses 5 through 7? I don't think so. Look at this. It says, they bear him up on the shoulder, they carry him and set him in his place, and he standeth. From his place shall he not remove. Their God is not going to go anywhere. He is where they put him. He's not going to get up and walk or move, because he can't, because it's not a God. From his place shall he not remove. What about our God? Our God is omnipresent. We can't put him anywhere, because he is everywhere. I cannot box him into a specific place and tell him what it is he is supposed to do. Sometimes it's hard to explain the mind of God to an unbeliever or a Satanist. When they say, how could God? How could a loving God fill in the blank? I could never worship a God who fill in the blank. Sometimes it's hard to explain God, because I'm human. And He is so much more than I can grasp, yet alone explain. But you see, God is omnipresent. I can't box Him in. Their gods He shall not remove from His place. He says, yea, one shall cry unto Him, yet He cannot answer, nor save him out of his trouble. And then we see a call to remembrance here. Look at verse number 8. Remember this, and show yourselves men. Bring it again to mind, O you transgressors. Remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is none else. I am God, and there is none like me, declaring the end from the beginning and from ancient times, the things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. He goes back there in verse number 8. Remember this, and show yourselves men. This idea of show yourselves men is this idea of standing up in courage. You know when it's easy to stand up courageously? When you know you've got the victory in the bag. You know when it's easy to stand up courageously? When you're not worried about what your enemy has to throw at you. That's when it's easy to stand up courageously. You know when it's not easy to stand up courageously? When you're afraid it's going to cost you something. Then courage takes on new meaning. Then you've got to stand despite the fact that you don't know if you have victory in the bag or not, but because it's the right thing to do. Now here, understand this. As Christians, we have the victory in the bag, and we know that. We understand who's ultimately going to win this thing. And so God says this, hey, did you not forget all I have done for you already, Israel, as your God? Did you think that I'm suddenly unable to part seas? Did you think that I'm suddenly unable to heal like I did with the brazen serpent? Did you suddenly think I was unable to provide food like I did with the manna? And here, Israel, you sit inside your walls, surrounded maybe by the Babylons, or you're thinking about this coming in the future. And for some reason, you seem to think that I am incapable of bringing the 10 plagues. That you seem to think that I am incapable of what I did to Assyria with Sennacherib and killing 185,000 of his army in one single night. Israel, suddenly you think I am incapable of helping you. What changed? It was not God that changed. And so God says, remember this. Recall this back up to your memory. The things of old, He says, for I am God, and there is none else. He says, I don't care if they have 500,000 men marching in perfect uniformity, wearing amazing uniforms with shiny shields and pointy spears, with big old banners, with horses and with chariots. I don't care if they have big old statues that they're carrying along right in the middle of their army. And I don't care if there's only 12 of you standing over here on this hillside. If I am with you, they have nothing because they have no God, because I am the only God. Christian, whatever our enemies may be, whether our enemies may be in the halls of power or our enemies may reside within the county, I feel like I know it to be the case that our biggest enemy resides within the walls of this church. We worry about the government, telling us we can't preach this or that. We worry about others getting upset with us because of our message, because we're intolerant or whatnot. But honestly, our biggest enemy is within the walls of this church. You say, the devil? He's here? Where? No. It's us. It's our own flesh. We are our biggest enemy. That is why we are to wrestle with our flesh. That is why we are to get control over our flesh at any cost, so that then we can gain the victory, so that we can have the armor of God upon us, so that we can then march out in unison as a church, as a body. We can march out in unison and attack the devil where he is. He says, I am God, there is none else. Whatever our enemies are, church, we need to remember who our God is. And so even if it's just us against a massive, powerful enemy that has endless resources, we have God. We have God if we're choosing to live obediently. We have God if we're choosing to be in His Word. We have God if we're choosing to walk in His Spirit. And so if we're choosing to do what's right, it does not matter how vocal our enemies may be. We have God, the one and the only God, and there is none like Him, declaring the end from the beginning, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. God knows the end from the beginning, and thus He's given us from Genesis 1:1, where it says, in the beginning, when the beginning began, there God was already. And we learn from John 1:1 that Jesus was there already, because He was the one who created all things. All the way through the book of Revelation, we see things to come, an eternity beyond the tribulation, beyond the millennial reign, things to come that goes off into sweet eternity in the New Jerusalem and the new earth and the new heaven. He's told us all of these things. My counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. When we remember this, then we will acquit ourselves like men. Then we will show ourselves like men, because we have a confidence in God when we begin to understand who He is. When we understand that God values us, which He does immensely. Otherwise, He would not have sent His only Son to go through not just the humiliation of becoming a human, and not just the humiliation of being falsely arrested, and not just the humiliation of being taken and beaten and put upon that cross, but ultimately the gross humiliation of having to bear the guilt and the penalty of our sins upon Him, therefore having to turn His back upon His own Son. He would not have done all of that if He were not the kind of God the Bible speaks to us of. He would not have done all of that if He did not value us. And when we understand our value to Him, then we begin to increase our trust and our faith in Him, no matter the situation. God's consistent purpose is to carry out what He has planned. If we are, as Christians, tempted to pursue anything that promises pleasure, comfort, peace, or security apart from God, we must not waver in the midst of that temptation. He does not waver. He declares His purpose, and then He follows through on His purpose unwaveringly, and so we can, in the midst of obedience, not waver. Look at verse number 11. Calling a ravenous bird from the east. Now, you see in the last two chapters, He's spoken about Cyrus openly, used his name. Here He calls him a ravenous bird from the east. I think that's a little bit interesting. Calling a ravenous bird from the east, the man that executeth my counsel from a far country. Cyrus, the man that I will call to execute my counsel. God's people need to remember that God always has a deliverer for His people. I wonder if we will live long enough to see, or if we will be left on this earth long enough to see a miraculous deliverance of Israel, or if the rapture will occur prior to that. But God will do it, even if He has to use a pagan king, even if He has to use the king of Saudi Arabia, or the king of Qatar. I hear him say it, Qatar, a lot. Or Jordan. That one has a king, I know. Who knows how God is going to do it? Or if you even have God uses the President of the United States, as godless as he is, God can use anyone to accomplish His purposes. Calling a ravenous bird from the east, the man that executeth my counsel from a far country. Yea, I have spoken it. I will also bring it to pass. You ever met somebody that when they say something, if you question them, they're like, oh, I have spoken. I said it, so I'm going to do it. You don't need to question it. We don't need to bring it up again. We don't need to rehash it. This is what I've said. This is exactly what's going to happen. End of discussion, right? Probably met some people like that. This is God. He already knew your argument before you brought it up. And so He says, this is my direction. This is what we're going to do. This is what I'm going to do anyways. Feel free to come along with me, or feel free to get left behind. But this is what I'm going to do, God says, and I will accomplish it. He says, I have purposed it. I will also do it. Hearken unto me, ye stout-hearted. This stout-hearted is the stubborn-hearted. Hearken unto me, you stubborn-hearted, that are far from righteousness. Sometimes the preacher lifts up his voice. Why? Because Harold fell asleep. So I got to lift up my voice and hit a few things, right? So that I can regain your attention again. Like, here's something important. And God sometimes has to get the man, of the prophet to lift up his voice, or to, stand for so many years, or to lay there naked for so many years, And he has to get people's attention. He says, hearken to me, you stubborn people. Ooh, whoa, careful there. Well, why are you being so pointed, Isaiah, in your preaching? Did you just call us a bunch of stubborn people? Yeah, those that are far from righteousness. He says, I bring near my righteousness. Oh, we see there. That's a good one. You've chosen to remain far from righteousness. Well, we know why. The law cannot save. No matter how hard Israel tries, the law will never save. And so God brings His righteousness. I like that. Bring near my righteousness. It shall not be far off, and my salvation shall not tarry. He says it's coming soon. My righteousness will be here, and my salvation is not going to wait. And I will place salvation in Zion for Israel, my glory. He says, my salvation shall not tarry. God's people need to remember that God's timing is always precise and wise. And when we are stubborn, we need to listen to the Lord to remember that He never delays and that God is never late. God always has His deliverer. He always knows exactly when to bring His deliverance. I think these verses here speak to the Babylonian captivity and the coming of Cyrus and the Medes and the Persians and his deliverance of Israel back to Jerusalem. Yes, obviously this speaks of that. But as I've mentioned many times, these prophets speak to short-term fulfillment, and they often speak to long-term fulfillment as well. So yeah, he speaks of Cyrus. But he speaks beyond Cyrus, down the road, to a coming deliverer named Jesus Christ, who is going to deliver not just His people, Israel, but is going to deliver all people of the earth. But then I think he also speaks even beyond that, to a time when Jesus Christ is going to come back to this earth and set His feet down here, and He's going to go and enter into Jerusalem triumphant. He's going to go into Jerusalem and He's going to rule and reign there for 1,000 years. And Israel is going to prosper. And we're all going to gather together unto Him, and we're going to rule and reign with Him for 1,000 years. I think he also speaks to this. God offers us present hope for our present needs. And so today, with discouragement, with tragedy, with loss, God offers us hope and comfort. As a Christian, He's put within us a comforter. He offers us current or our present hope for our present needs, but He goes beyond that and also offers us a future hope. A hope that we can look beyond this short time and we can look off into the future of eternity, and we have a future hope that will help to carry us through these times. His righteousness is near us, and we need not to wait long for His salvation. In fact, you don't need to wait long at all to be able to understand His righteousness and take on the benefits of it. All you need to do is to place your faith and trust in Jesus Christ and what He did on that cross to save you from your sins. And not of ourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. Then can His salvation come into your life. Then can His righteousness become superimposed upon you, so that when God looks at you, He does not see you, but He sees His Son and His righteousness. And He takes your righteousness and your sin, and He scatters it as far as the east is from the west to be forgotten. Because your sin has already been paid for. What needs to be done is for you to place your faith and trust in Him. And so chapter number 46 is not a long chapter, just those 13 verses. It deals with familiar topics now, with the false gods, with God proclaiming and naming Himself as He has done a lot in these past several chapters. I am God. I am the only God. Don't trust those false gods. Trust me. Remember what I've done. Trust me. And so tonight we talked about that. when we understand just how valuable we are to God, and we can clearly in the Bible see how valuable we are to Him, then we can understand how to trust Him.